Hi, welcome back to ASL 101. This is a bonus session. We're going to look at machine guns and rates of fire. I'm Russ Gifford. I get to be your tour guide, so if you're ready, let's go. Now, my goal for this session is a simple one, although the subject can be a little bit more complex. It's to delve deeper into the machine gun's rate of fire. You've seen it on a couple of the previous slideshows that we've done. In those sessions, I've shown you a machine gun and I've shown you rate of fire, but there's a few special things that I'd just like to go over before we get on into fire lanes and machine guns. So, if you're ready, let's step into it. It's abbreviated as ROF. You see it all over the squad leader manual. And we're going to see that squad weapon machine guns and many other weapons have a chance to fire more than once per turn. We call this a rate of fire. It's noted by the box number that you see on any counter for that weapon. Now we see this on most guns, and by guns I mean the items on the big 5/8 inch counter, the anti-tank weapons and things like that, the 75 millimeter towed guns. But we have this on squad weapons as well. So your machine guns, your light machine guns, your heavy machine guns, as you can see here, all are examples of squad weapons because they're the half-inch counters, and they have a boxed number in them. That boxed number means this weapon has a rate of fire and can possibly fire again. What's the key to that? On any attack, if your colored die is less than or equal to that boxed number, then that machine gun's going to get to fire again. Now, there are exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But let's get into an example first. It's the American prep fire phase. Our plucky 747 with his medium machine gun is surrounded almost, I tell you, by all these Germans. He's going to fire at somebody, and we're going to group them together and fire at one target. And the target we've chosen is the 467 in F2. Well, as long as we're at it, since we're going to do that, what are the firepower? What would the firepower and the die roll modifiers be if that's our target? That's your job. You have to figure that out. Just imagine the Jeopardy theme song going here. All right, have you got it? Here we go. See if my figures are right. You know, I could make mistakes. I've got a squad with a 747 fire. So their firepower is 7. The machine gun's firepower is 4. We're going to add those together to get 11 and multiply that times 2. Why? Because it's point blank fire. It's the target is adjacent. And that comes out to 22 firepower points, but when we look at the infantry fire table, we'll notice there is no 22 column, so it always drops back to the next closest column, going backwards to the left. So that'd be a 20 firepower attack. Now the 467 is inside that building in F2. In fact, they're both inside the same building. So it is a +3. It's a stone building. It's gray, so it's a +3. So 20 firepower +3. Now, what result, if we're going to attack, what result would allow that medium machine gun to fire again? And of course, you got it immediately, a colored die of 1 or 2, correct? Yep, if the colored die is 1 or 2 and the squad does not cower, the machine gun can fire again. Wait a minute, Russ. What's this? You're suddenly saying there is something else. And that's what I said earlier. Yes, anytime I roll the colored die less than or equal to whatever's on that box, they'll get to fire again, but there are exceptions, and one of them is cowering. What is cowering? Okay, so what is cowering? Anytime I have infantry that are firing that's not leader directed and they roll doubles on a shot, they're said to have cowered. Now that means that their fire effectiveness is reduced. We show that by dropping them back one column to the left. So if they were firing on the 6 fire table or fire column, they would fire on the 4 instead. If they'd been firing 20, it would drop to the 16 column. but more importantly, it ends that unit's fire for the phase, and it doesn't matter uh, if they have fired their squad weapons. It doesn't matter if they're in the middle of a rate of fire. If they'd rolled to get rate of fire, it's over for that unit. And since we have to have a unit, an infantry unit, squad or half squad, to fire the squad weapons, cowering will end that. Now, what did I say overcomes that? That's if it's leader directed. And remember, to have leader directed fire, you have to be stacked with the leader, and the leader has to have applied his die roll modifier. Now, even if he's an 8-0 unit, he's still applying a 0 modifier, but he's applying it. That counts. And I cannot apply a modifier as a leader unless I'm stacked with you. In other words, I'm in the same location. So I can't have leader-directed multi-location fire groups unless I had a leader in each, stacked with each unit in each location. And that gets a little difficult because who's got as many leaders as they've got troops? Or if you're down to that situation at the end of a game, it's looking pretty bleak anyway. So we'll get back to cowering in a little while, but let's go on with our presentation here. And getting on with the presentation, it's quiz time. I want you to name the highest number possible on a colored die. Now, I keep saying on the colored die, we're rolling both dies together whenever we shoot, right? But one of them is colored, and that colored die is the one that determines rate of fire. So, what's the highest possible number on the colored die that would retain rate of fire for these weapons? And for extra credit, name the order of battle nationality of these squad weapons. That was easy, wasn't it? The colored die, I've put them up there, superimposed above it, because you see the items on the box, and I'm really just trying to point out that these are there. Now, other weapons besides machine guns have rate of fire, correct? And if they do, they're boxed. Now, the big guns have rate of fire, and the tanks, AFVs, have rate of fire on many of them as well. They're in a box, work very much the same way. So, to recap, on any fire attack, that colored die less than or equal to the weapon's rate of fire, then the machine gun's going to fire again. And we said if the original attack was leader directed, the leader was stacked with the unit, the leader applied his die roll modifier to that machine guns or squad weapons attack. If that machine gun gets rate of fire on the attack, then the leader can direct the next the rate of fire attack and continue to do so as long as the unit continues to get rate of fire. That's really big, isn't it? I think so. I'm sure you agree. Now remember what that really means. That means the leader was stacked with the unit in the same location, and the leader applied his die roll modifier, and he applied it to the machine gun or the weapon that has rate of fire possibility. He applied it to that weapon. In other words, if we had had a leader with that 747 and the medium that we used in our initial example, if the leader had been with it and the 747 fired one way and the leader applied his bonus to that attack while the machine gun was going to fire at somebody else, the machine gun would, even if the machine gun got rate of fire, he would not get the leader. The leader could not suddenly switch and for the rate of fire start to apply his die roll modifier. It does not work that way. Now, something to remember though, there's some very important limitations on rate of fire. And I've mentioned one of them already. That was cowering. Cowering will end rate of fire for a unit if it has not been leader directed. If it's leader directed, it didn't cower. But there are other limitations, and you need to know these. I've already told you these. Cowering cancels rate of fire. We've covered it. Leadership only applies to rate of fire if the leader actually directed the initial fire that qualifies then for the rate of fire. Here's the bigger ones. Here is a huge limitation, though, on rate of fire that we need to think about. Medium and heavy machine guns in buildings, in woods, in rubble. If they get rate of fire, they cannot change the covered arc from their original one when they got the rate of fire. So in other words, look at our example below. Will this medium machine gun, even if he gets unlimited rates of fire, he can never hit everybody in this single phase because you're locked for the rest of the phase if you get rate of fire, but you're using a medium or a heavy from a building, woods, or rubble. So he could not shoot at everybody, could he? Now, if he were in brush, he could. If he were in clear ground, he could. If he were a light machine gun, he could. But as a medium or a heavy firing from a building, whatever he chooses as his initial covered arc is all he's going to be able to fire into with rate of fire for the rest of the phase. Got some big choices to make before you fire then, don't you? So using that picture, and it's the example we started this scenario with, we would have had to decide what his covered arc was. And technically, we should probably do that before we fire. We definitely have to do it mentally before we fire. Most people will say you can declare it after you fire and make sure that it's, as long as the target is within that covered arc, you're okay. In other words, before you choose your second target. But technically, I think the book would actually tell you you should do it beforehand. So if you get a sticky opponent, it could be a big deal. So in our example, the American states he's going to fire at the unit in F2, and he declares that his covered arc will be F2G3. So in other words, he hits F2G3. If he had covered arc, he could then fire to the 3 hexes beyond that, the 4 beyond that. What that means is, even if he gets rate of fire, he'll be able to fire at the 2, 4, 7 and G3, or he could fire again at the F2, 6, 4, 4, 6, 7, but he could never fire at the E1, 4, 6, 7 this phase. He could never fire at the 9, 2 and the half squad that's behind him this phase. He cannot change because he's in a building. He will not be able to change his declared covered arc after he makes the first shot. He's got to get rate of fire for it to matter, and he would have to have the first shot. Now realize this is where splitting your fire up could be so important. You could take the squad, and the squad could fire, if he hasn't fired at all yet, the squad could fire his inherent firepower at the 2 over there, while the machine gun could fire at whichever of the other ones he wanted in a different covered arc. Of course, you've got to feel that you're going to get lucky. You've got to feel a lot of things. You have to make the choices based on your criteria. What's more important? What do I really need? But if we're talking about the rate of fire, he needs to make sure that he declares a covered arc if he's in a building or woods or rubble, and he's a medium or heavy machine gun. Light machine gun, he doesn't have a problem. So the other limitation we really need to remember as well, though, is the rate of fire is dependent upon movement points or movement factor expenditures if you're firing during the movement phase. In other words, if you are the defender firing defensive first fire during your opponent's movement phase, you can only use your rate of fire based off movement points, because remember, defensive first fire, it does require movement points to trigger them. And I keep saying movement points, movement factors to trigger them. So let's see how that works. I've got a heavy machine gun with a half squad. So the half squad is going to give up his inherent firepower to fire the heavy, right? Obviously, it's got a lot more punch. That means he could also get rate of fire if he rolls what on a colored die? 1 or a 2 or a 3 on the colored die roll of the attack, and as long as he doesn't cower, correct? So, can he fire now, though? It's the American movement phase. He's got to wait for the American to move. So, the American's going to oblige him. And he makes an assault movement to I1. I1 is an open ground hex, so if the German were to fire, he'd get 6 firepower minus 1 for the unit moving in the open. He doesn't get the other minus 1 for first fire non-assault because the American did assault move, didn't he? So with that, if he takes that shot, it's going to be 6 minus 1, and he says, that's a pretty good shot, I can't pass that up. Now he should declare his covered arc, and what he does is declared I2, J2 as the covered arc, and he got rate of fire, didn't he? Look at that, that 1 and a 6 minus 1 on the 7, so that's 7 minus 1 is 6. On the 6 firepower, if you check me out on that, that should be a 6 on the 6 is the 1 morale check. So what happens? The American rolls and he pins. He rolled a 6 as well, which a 1 morale check to make it a 7. So he's going to pin. Notice the half squad got the first fire, not the machine gun. Why? Because the machine gun got rate of fire. But can the German fire at the 747 again? And the answer is no. He can't fire at that 747 because the 747, even though he assault moved, he didn't use any more points than it cost him to get into the hex. He assault moved for 1 point because it was clear ground, 1 movement factor. So he can't fire again because he's already fired using the 1 movement factor that triggered it. He'd have to wait for somebody else to move. So that said, he's declared the covered arc from I2 to J2, so somebody's got to move in one of those hexes for him to get an attack at them, right? That's that other concern. I'm in the building, so the German's in the building. He has to have that declared covered arc, and then he wouldn't be able to change it. Declares I2, J2 as the covered arc, and jumps into the building. And if he gets an attack at him, a 6 firepower, minus 1 non-assault movement, because he used 2 points getting in and did not declare assault movement, has a 2 TEM, so it's going to be a 6 firepower plus 1 this time if the German fires. Can the German fire at him? Yes. And look at that. He fires a 7. 7 plus 1 is 8 on the 6, which makes it a pin task check. Woohoo! All right. And it was within his covered arc. He had every right to do so. If the American passes this time, which he does with a 7, oh, pin task check, 7 on a 7 morale unit, he passes if it's a pin task check. Can the German fire at him again now? What's the answer? Yes, because this 747 spent 2 movement factors getting into J1. So he can fire at him again. So let's take a quiz then. I've got this beautiful heavy machine gun up in a great location up here on the second floor of that big building that's he's in second floor of the hex in J3, and he's got lots of units he can fire at. All of them all over the board. Look at all those guys. The Americans are making a run at him, and this kind of things happens. He's got lots of targets, and with a 3 rate of fire, he's got reason to believe he's going to get a lot of shots. Now, it's prep fire, which means I can fire until I run out of rate of fire, right? So if the German continues to roll a 3 or less on the colored die, could he shoot everybody in this phase? It's a trick question. I'm really into trick questions lately. It's a trick question. I'm going to make you use your thoughts here. So, if he continues to roll 3 or less on the colored die, does he get to shoot at everybody? Would he be able to shoot at everybody this phase? And the answer is no, but it's no for a lot of reasons. If he shoots, he's got to declare his covered arc because he's in a building, and that's the main reason, right? So if he declares his covered arc as J2 and I3, J2 I3, and I've got the yellow line showing it, he's going to get the shot at the unit in the open, and if he gets rate of fire, his covered arc is going to extend out to H2, I2, and J1, and it would continue to spread out to G2, H1, I1, J0, and that pretty much encompasses, so that tells us he could get almost everyone, but K2 is outside the covered arc, isn't it? See him down there? Outside that covered arc, so I could never, even if I roll 3 or less on my colored die all the time, and it's a 50-50 chance, right? I'm still never going to be able to shoot at that one. But I did say it was a trick question, and here's the trick question part of it. You could have said no, because he could still cower. If he rolls 3-3, 2-2, or 1-1 on his die roll, that's going to cower. Now, just for an example, what happens if he cowers? I've got that 7 firepower machine gun, so it's a 6 firepower attack because there is no 7 column. He fires at the 747 and he rolls a snake eyes. You can't get any better than that, right? Well, the problem with that, of course, is that it's going to cower, and since he's an experienced unit, he's not a conscript, he's not a green unit, he's experienced, he will only cower just 1 column to the left, which is 4 firepower, and a snake eyes in the open on a 4 firepower is still a pretty mean attack, right? But cowering ends fire for the phase. It's a 1 morale check, and cowering ends fire for the phase. He can't shoot at anybody else, even though his colored die was lower. But it's even a trickier question. Ready? The trick part of this question is that no matter what, the MG can't hit the unit in H2, can he? H2 is that mandatory blind hex behind the building in I3. I have enough height being on level 2 to see over I3, and I can see to the ground. But there's always a minimum of 1 blind hex, and the only thing that could reduce that is if I'm above the minimum distance to see to over a unit. So I would have to be in a church steeple on level 3 to see past that and down. Now remember, those minimum bind hexes don't happen with hills, they only happen with buildings and trees and things like that. But this is just a reminder that everything you're learning in these sessions has to fit together. So I can see everything else on the board, can't I? That's the only unit he can't see. Good news is, if he gets rid of all the rest, what do we care about the 337, right? Well, we do care because he's only a 247. Speaking of how things work together, the 247 running that heavy machine gun's a half squad, so he has no inherent firepower left if he fires a squad weapon, correct? So where that 747 could have fired his inherent firepower one direction and his machine gun another, in this case, if the half squad chooses to fire the machine gun, that constitutes his entire fire, doesn't it? So I'm trying to teach you lots of things here at once, but we're focusing on machine guns with rate of fire, so let's get back to that. Well, I hope that gives you a good overview of rate of fire. Also realize that pin will have an impact on rate of fire. If you're a non-qualified unit trying to use a weapon, that will bring the rate of fire down by one item. So in other words, if it was a 3, it was a 2. Now that doesn't usually count for machine guns because your squad has been trained how to fire a squad weapon. It does affect Japanese using their medium and heavies. They need to be crew fired. So in other words, they'd have to have a crew counter. A half squad or a squad doesn't qualify for that. Now, so that you can apply what you've learned about machine gun rate of fire, think about this. Those big 5/8 inch counters for guns, those are crew served, aren't they? While I can have a half squad or a squad fire that, they would be non-qualified. So their rate of fire would not be as good. Also, of course, they have penalties to their hits, their ability to shoot it. They can't target it as well. So non-qualified use is an important thing to think about, but not so much in the squad weapon area. That's usually in the gun area. But everything you learned here does matter. Now, also remember, you don't get rate of fire if you're using fire lanes, and if you get rate of fire, you don't leave residual. So if you want to leave residual fire during a movement phase, and that might be important, you're afraid you can't get a lucky enough shot, and you had a good residual that you'd like to leave there, you might choose to let go of the rate of fire and leave the residual instead. But under normal circumstances, a machine gun's rate of fire doesn't leave residual if they are going to get another shot. If it's the last shot, if you rolled badly, you got the hit or not, but you didn't get rate of fire, that shot can leave residual. So, for further information on this, very specifically, you can read section A 6.4, 7.9, and then 9.0 to 9.2.1. And that's all in your Advanced Squad Leader Rulebook. So that's a start on this combat. We've got a lot more to learn. When we come back, we're going to be learning about assault fire, spray fire, and fire lanes, and that's in session 6. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this.